Hi, I'm Jim Messina.
And I am John Nestor.
And today we want to talk a little bit about the history of our profession from the very beginning. I think a very interesting thing that I think mental health counselors in Florida are kind of not really aware of the fact that in 1976, out of Escambia County Community Mental Health Center, there were two mental health practitioners, Nancy Spiso and myself, who were very interested in doing mental health work in the community mental health center system. And Nancy came up to me, she says, "Jim, you're never going to believe there was an article in the Guidepost about these guys who think there should be a new division." I go, "Really? Well, what has to happen? Do you want to get involved?" She goes, "Yeah, let's start a division." So literally all I said to her was, "I'll call Thelma Daly or Chuck Lewis." Chuck Lewis was the executive director of APGA at the time, and Thelma Daly was the president. Well, she goes, "You know those people?" I go, "Yeah. I worked for Thelma Daly as the national chairman in negotiations for the School Counseling Association, and because of that work, Chuck Lewis knew me really well." So I immediately called Chuck, who then got a hold of Thelma. He says, "Jim, absolutely. We saw that letter in the Guidepost. We totally agree. It only takes 200 people for divisional status to make the application. All you got to do is write a letter to the Guidepost, you're on your way." He said, "Of course, you're going to have to come up with a title and come up with some provisions." So I looked at Nancy. I said, "Oh, great. Now we got to think of a title." So I said, "All right, we're counselors, mental health. Why don't we call ourselves mental health counselors?" Okay, that was our title. That was it, spontaneous, on the spot. So then I said, "Well, we got to have a title of the division." So, oh boy. I said, "It should look kind of cute. So maybe an A at the beginning, an A at the end. What do you think?" She goes, "Okay," because really neither of us were invested at all. And I said, "Okay, that's it. We're going to write the letter. We're going to start a division of APGA as the American Mental Health Counselors Association," because we have the A's going together, "and we will try to get 200 people who want to join us." We had 500 people respond to the Guidepost letter. We put in a formal request to the APGA board to become a division, and they, at their annual conference, were not able to accept that application because they decided to hold off a year to clarify how a division would come into being. Well, that meant then American Mental Health Counselors had a choice. We could either go off on our own, independent for a while, or we could just wait. And by then we had 1,000 people waiting. So with 1,000 people, we incorporated into the state of Florida as a nonprofit, and we became American Mental Health Counselors Association. And then around within a year, we had a vote, and the vote to become a division or not to become a division. And the people who voted to be a division won. And at that point, Nancy, who was the first president of AMHCA, said, "Well, Jim, I just don't really feel I really want to get involved with this anymore." And I said, "Fine, we'll take it from there." And then I just handled the presidency of AMHCA until we became incorporated with American APGA. And we were incorporated with an APGA, and I was the first president under the APGA.
What year, Jim, what year was that?
That was in 77, 78. And it was in 78 when I called the board of directors together in Columbia, Maryland, and I said, "Listen, we got to decide where we're going here." I said, "I think we created something bigger than a bread box, and I have no clue what we're doing." Because by then I had transferred from Florida to Johns Hopkins University, was working in Columbia, Maryland. So our first annual conference of AMHCA was held in Columbia, Maryland. So that's where we did the blueprint. And in the blueprint, we made a decision that we needed a national certification. The national certification, the intention was to be able to be attracted to states to get state licensure, since there were no state license. We also made a decision that we would work with Carol Bobby, who was then the acting chairperson for APGA, to create a credentialing body. And we would work with Tom Clausen to work on certification. Now, we had no intentions of creating our own National Board of Certified Counselors. We wanted to have it under the larger umbrella. But Tom said, "Go ahead, because, you know, APGA, we take forever." And so our board at that point, with the blueprint, made that decision. That blueprint became the marching orders for this is what we need to accomplish. We had already implemented the journal. Our first journal editor was Bill Weichel, and the first edition of that came out in 1979. The Code of Ethics, like I told you, I had written that immediately, just gobbled everything that ACA had and made that the AMHCA Code of Ethics. And then, so Bill was going at it, and Jim Hyatt, out of University of Florida. By the way, Bill Weichel, graduate of University of Florida. Jim Hyatt, University of Florida. He was the editor of our newsletter, and that started immediately. And then what happened is that all of that was going all well and good, and then we decided we would start the academy, and the National Academy came into being at the end of that year, and we created the credentials and all that stuff, and that came into being by 78, 79, and then somewhere in all of that, Tom Clausen called and said, we're ready. Okay, good. So then Carol Bobby was on that committee, as well as a few other individuals from ACA, and a large representation from CRC, the Council of Rehabilitation people. And then we went ahead and gave them all the procedures that we had for our academy and made that the MBCC, and that's when I became the founding board member of MBCC. But the bottom line was, I then moved to Florida, and I had a job at Florida Mental Health Institute. And I get this call from three guys. Jim, we need your help. I said, what do you need my help for? We want to sunset. We want to sunset the 490 board. Why? I don't even know what the 490 board is. Tell me what we're talking about here. So they explained it was the licensing board for psychologists.
Who were the three?
I have no idea what their names were. They were like out of nowhere. I didn't know who they were. I didn't know how they knew me. They said, oh, we know about you because of AMHCA. I said, oh, okay, good. So anyways, I go, really? So I foolishly, and my wife agreed, I would go up once a week with them to Tallahassee, and we would go to these meetings, and we began to meet people in the State House and in the Senate, and then they told us what we needed to do. They got the bill to sunset. The sunset occurred, or the bill got passed to sunset, but we needed to immediately write the language for the new law, the new 490 law. This is very important, and this is where John's going to come in. So the 490 law got rewritten, including licensed psychologists, school psychologists, social work, marriage and family therapists, and mental health counselors. The mental health counselor enabling legislation writing came from three sources. First, of course, it came from the Virginia Licensing Act. Carl Swanson up in Virginia gave me total permission to do that. He was chairman at the time. Then the second place that it came from was, of course, the National Academy of Certified Clinical Mental Health Counselors. And the combination of those two, we were able to produce the product. The third source was actually University of Florida's graduate program in Counselor Ed. Right. Because I was doing my postdoc in Gainesville. I taught for them, became close friends with all this team, especially Joe Whitmer, and God bless his soul. And it was a really moving time for me. And it was, yeah. So, yeah, it's unreal. So it's been it was a real moving experience, because Nancy graduated from Florida. I should never say, she's a University of Florida graduate too. So we were very invested in that 60-hour program. The reason was that I believed strongly from we wrote the blueprint for the profession. My board agreed that we should utilize the 60-hour program, same 60-hour program that currently was being done in Virginia for their licensing act. Currently, the program that was being done at University of Florida in their EDS program. But more importantly, it would give us a credential, some meat when we went up against social work, because we would have equivalent credentialing in terms of graduate hours.
Social workers at the time had 60 credits.
Right.
Social work at that time, there was no such thing as undergrad, grad, whatever. It was a 60-hour master's program. And I used those standards. In fact, you will see Carl Swanson and I both honestly admit it. We used the what is it called? The National Academy of Clinical Social Workers standards to come up with internship, practicums, requirements, all that kind of good stuff. So we were really excited about it. And so these three guys, they were nutcases. They would take me up to Tallahassee once a week, and then we were able to, I walked in with our enabling legislation work was done for licensed mental health counselor yesterday. It was that easy for me to do. Whereas marriage and family, we had a difficult time finding somebody to represent marriage and family. And social work was difficult only because these three guys had never involved social work. So we had to get a social work party in. So.
And there were some issues going on with social work at that time as well, between the regular social work group and the clinical social work group. You know, the clinical social work group didn't feel as though that the regular social workers should be part of this bill.
Right.
The other piece that I do want to emphasize, though, in this whole process is, and this is during 77, 78, 79, and around the sunset, Dr. Joe Whitmer, who is then the chair of the department at U of F, also encouraged students, doctoral students and master's level students like myself to go up to Tallahassee and advocate and lobby for this bill. And again, that was the emphasis of where the University of Florida, and everything came out of Florida.
What happened is like I said, I always felt like a lone wolf out there, but with Joe's support, we always had his graduate students come on board. So then when we finally went to committee hearings, and then when we finally went to the final vote, we had a contingency, mostly UF students who were there. And of course, they accepted me as one of them because I did my postdoc there. I never told them I got my degree from University of Buffalo in New York.
I always thought he was a UF graduate just like me. Until last year.
It was like, well, you know, we New Yorkers, we come down to Florida, they called us carpetbaggers, and everybody told me, Jim, emphasize that you're a Gator. So I did, dutifully. I'm a Gator. So with the legislators, they just thought I was a UF Gator, and I never really talked about New York at all. But what was really, really, really intriguing to me was that the bill passed. And what happened then was a brouhaha raised in the state. Counselor educators throughout the state complained vociferously because the law was requiring a higher level of standard than what they were currently providing. They were only providing 30 graduate hours for a master's. That was it. So they were very upset.
I think the only one that was providing 60 hours was Florida.
So how can you use that elitist university as your model for this licensure? I was freaked out. I didn't know what to say.
Right.
But fortunately, there was a transition right around that time where there were enough people who were committed to the mental health counseling by then. FMHCA didn't quite get started then, but I think it was in the emerging status. And all I know is that there were some mental health counselors who were willing to take over the fight from that point. Because in case you didn't add the years up, from the start of FMHCA until the Licensing Act passed in Florida, until I could get off the board of MBCC, I had dedicated 9 years of my life to professional association stuff. And guess who I ignored? Our finances, my job, my business, life. I had to go back to reconnect with, I got to make a living. And so I had to back away. And fortunately, I think some FMHCA people took over. But this was a right. So
the important piece here, though, is
Go ahead.
because a lot of people forget, is that 490 sunset, we then came in with a new 490, which we were part of. That happened prior to 491.
So we just discovered today, to John's chagrin, that I said, John, I'm telling you, you were licensed earlier than 1987, because last year he told me he was licensed in 1987. I said, no, that can't be real. So today he goes to the board, he looks up his license name, and he goes, you're never going to believe this. When were you licensed?
1982.
And
when the new law passed and it was being implemented.
And he was saying at the Laws and Rules meeting yesterday, he kept on thinking, I'm 490 board, the 490 board. Right. He says, I can understand why I keep on saying the 490 board. And I said at the time, I said, it's because most probably you were licensed under the 490 board. But this is where the exciting news comes, and this I'm handing it off to John, because from this point on, this is all about 491, and I think John needs to talk that history.
Okay, so again, in 491, the exciting piece of that was we were on this, part of this 490 law, okay? And many of us, I don't know how many, but I'm going to know pretty soon, got licensed under 490. The problem with it was, it became very evident very quickly, was we were subservient to the psychologists. Even though we're on their board, we were subservient. And the staff person that was assigned to us, and even assigned to us furthermore when we got under 491, was also assigned to the psychologist. And that created some conflict of interest, to be nice about it. So it became evident very quickly, we got to do something about this. And so there was a move now to get out of Chapter 490 and create a whole new law that was for, at that time, we thought was going to be for licensed mental health counselors. But after, dealing with the legislature and dealing with some of our lobbyist people, they said, you got to come in as a unified group, meaning all the professions, if you want to pull this off. So, at that time, FMHCA, it wasn't a big group. It was still under the Florida ACA at that time. I was at that point, I believe I was at that point past president of FMHCA, and either Dr. Larry Shires was president or Dr. Pete Fisher from UCF was president. And so I suggested, hey, why don't we call a meeting and bring all these people together and let's have a chat. And I believe it was Dr. Pete Fisher was the chair. And so we did. And that's when we found out, at least at this level, that there was such conflict between the clinical social workers and the social workers. There wasn't, it did appear, that we could work together as a group between the clinical social workers, licensed marriage and family, and the mental health counselors. Now me, I didn't care. All I wanted was, hey guys, we got to do this. If we want a law and we want our own law, we've got to go in as a unified group. We've got to get over these hurdles of our political problems internally. And so marriage and family at that time also came in with a lobbyist, Jody Fitzgerald. And she helped us with this. And she helped lobby for the law and gave at that time advice to people. Some people suggested, well, maybe there's some conflict there because she's representing all groups. But the bottom line, all due respect to Jody Fitzgerald, is she helped us get that law passed. I'm happy, But she was, at that time, very close to the marriage and family group. Now, simultaneously, historically, and I didn't know this until it became AMHCA president, historically, Florida, the marriage and family group were anti-licensed mental health counselors. But yet we were able to pull them in with us in the state of Florida, even though at the national level, they were told, don't do that. But they did it, because they knew these people were very pragmatic. They understood, if we're going to have this law, sorry, we understand what you're saying national, we want a law. If we're going to have a law, we're going to have to work together. And we did. And they did, and we got Chapter 491 done. It was signed by Governor Bob Martinez, 1987. I was the chair, the first chair, the founding chair of the group. And interesting enough, this is very interesting. Each group had 2 members, plus we had the public members. I think there were 2 or 3 public members.
Right.
Well, guess who was my co-chair? Larry Shires, Dr. Larry Shires, a FMHCA person. You know, they gave the whole thing over to us to then, you know, spearhead. But both Larry and I worked very well with everybody there, you know, to make sure that we got what we needed. Then the politics really started because a law is a law, but now you need some administrative rule to implement this law. And you talk about the politics. You know, you had nothing. The universities started coming after us. NBC started coming after us. Testing people started coming after us. You know, all wanting, you know, I had a big battle one time on that board over continuing education. You know, we wanted to write that up. And I was the chair now, and I'm saying, Larry, please take over. I need to sit down and talk. I said, if someone can demonstrate to me and show me there is evidence that by taking courses through continuing education, that you're going to improve the quality of the service provided by that clinician, then I'll buy it. But other than that, I won't, because there was no literature for that. Well, I lost out on that. We had to get our CEUs. But it was that's a minor battle. That's just an example of some of the battles that we did have when we first started on this. But it was an incredible growing period. But it was a wonderful period, you know, because now we have got our profession in this state, and we're leading it. And I was just in heaven because I wanted a place to hang my hat, as did a lot of other people who were calling themselves, you know, mental health counselors.
The other thing John and I were talking about is that at the time, John could have been grandfathered in as a psychologist,
Right.
as well as LMHC,
Yeah.
as well as an LMFT.
Right.
And I had the same opportunity. And it was intriguing how we were looking at how our trails went separate directions, because I had a financial requirement to start making a living. In 1982, I knew that as a licensed professional, as a licensed psychologist, I would be able to make a decent living. I didn't know how good it would be, but at least I'd make a decent living. But as an LMHC, in 1982, I had a real difficult time trying to figure out who's going to hire me. So then I was offered, because of my credentials, the same thing. I could have been an LMFT, LMHC, and psychologist, and I made the decision after looking at the total bill of over $1,000 and no money in the bank. I said, I think I'll just go for one psychology. He makes the same decision, but a different direction. He made this single case for LMHC. So in many ways, the beauty of this was there was a transition. It was a handover, not intentional, because I never even knew John at the time, but a handover to it's the next generation to work on the professional identity. But one of the things we talked about too was the reason why there has been such contention with psychology in the licensing boards are a good example. It was mentioned in Laws and Rules yesterday about the fact that Baker Act is now available for mental health counselors, marriage and family, and social workers to Baker Act as well as psychologists. And I said, you know, it's really interesting that lady who presented didn't mention the fact that it took years. It wasn't until 2005 at best when mental health counselors were given the ability to do involuntary placement.